Welcome to Café Stories. I'm your host Alfie, bringing you another captivating tale today. I'd love to know where you're tuning in from. Tell me in the comments below. Today we're diving into A Matter of Taste, a Nero Wolfe mystery, where the brilliant detective and his loyal assistant Archie Goodwin investigate a death that occurred right at their dinner table. Let's begin. Nero Wolfe and the Matter of Taste. Chapter 1. An invitation declined, then accepted. It was a Tuesday in April, one of those perfect New York spring days that make you forget the winter ever happened, and Nero Wolfe was in a mood. Not that this was unusual. His moods were as much a fixture in the brownstone as the orchids in the plant rooms. But this particular mood had a distinct flavour to it. I had learned to catalogue them over the years. I was at my desk, typing up the final report on the Harmonson embezzlement case when Fritz appeared at the office door. He carried a silver tray with Wolfe's morning beer and a cream-coloured envelope. "A messenger just delivered this, Archie," Fritz said. "It is marked personal for Mr. Wolfe." I glanced at the clock. 10:27. "He's still with the plants. Leave it here, and I'll take it up when he's done." Fritz placed the tray on my desk. The messenger said it was most urgent. From Monsieur Marchand. That got my attention. I stopped typing. Victor Marchand? The L'Apogée Marchand? Oui. Fritz's expression softened the way it does when he encounters a fellow traveller in the realm of haute cuisine. A culinary artist of the highest order. I picked up the envelope. Heavy stationery, expensive, the kind that announces money before you even read what's inside. "I'll take it up," I said. If it's about food, he might forgive the interruption. Fritz nodded gravely, understanding the calculation. Wolfe's time with the orchids was sacred, but so was anything involving serious cooking. Upstairs in the plant rooms, Wolfe was using a small pair of scissors to remove a withered bloom from a cattleya. Theodore Horseman hovered nearby, his face locked in its perpetual expression of mild disapproval. When I entered, neither of them looked up. "Sorry to interrupt," I said, not sounding sorry at all, "but a messenger just delivered this from Victor Marchand. Fritz thought you might want to see it right away." Wolfe finished his precise cut before acknowledging my existence. "Pfui, nothing is so urgent it cannot wait 33 minutes until 11 o'clock. It's from the Victor Marchand of L'Apogée." A subtle shift in his posture told me I had chosen the right approach. Wolfe placed the scissors on the bench and held out his hand. I gave him the envelope, and he opened it with a deliberate lack of hurry that fooled neither of us. He read it, his lips pushing out and in slightly, a sign of interest rather than displeasure, and then folded the paper back into the envelope. "Thank you, Archie. Please inform Fritz I will need to speak with him at 11. You may return to your work." So that was that. I went back downstairs, no wiser than before. At precisely 11 o'clock, Wolfe descended in the elevator, crossed to his desk, and settled his 1/7 of a ton into the custom-built chair. He rang for beer, and while Fritz was opening it, he shared the contents of the envelope. "Mr. Marchand has invited me to a private dinner at L'Apogée tomorrow evening. He is unveiling a new dish and desires my opinion." Fritz's eyebrows rose. "A great honour, sir." "Perhaps." Wolfe poured his beer with his usual care. "I have no intention of accepting." I leaned back in my chair. "Correct me if I'm wrong, but isn't L'Apogée that place where you need to book 3 months in advance and leave your firstborn as collateral?" "Your hyperbole is unnecessary, Archie. L'Apogée is indeed exclusive, and Mr. Marchand is a chef of considerable talent. However, I see no reason to disrupt my routine for what amounts to a publicity stunt." Fritz looked pained. "Sir, if I may—" "Monsieur Marchand rarely seeks outside opinions. This is quite extraordinary." "So is my comfort," Wolfe replied. "Draft a courteous refusal, Archie." I turned to my typewriter. What excuse shall I give? The truth that you're too comfortable to leave the house, or something more creative, perhaps a sudden allergy to French cuisine? Wolfe ignored my sarcasm, which was his standard response when I was right, and he knew it. The phone rang. I answered. "Nero Wolfe's office. Archie Goodwin speaking. This is Victor Marchand. I must speak with Mr. Wolfe immediately." I covered the mouthpiece. Marchand himself, demanding an audience. Wolfe frowned, but nodded. I transferred the call. "This is Nero Wolfe." I could hear Marchand's voice, rapid and accented, but couldn't make out the words. Whatever he was saying, it was making an impression. Wolfe's eyebrows had lifted 1/16 of an inch. "I see," Wolfe said after listening for nearly a minute. "That is unexpected." More from Marchand. "I charge very high fees, Mr. Marchand." Another burst from the caller. "Very well. Archie will handle the arrangements. Good day." He hung up and looked at me. "Mr. Marchand has offered to pay my daily fee plus expenses merely for my attendance and honest assessment of his new creation." I whistled. "Your daily fee just to eat dinner at a fancy restaurant? Either he's desperate for publicity or serious about your opinion." "He claims the latter. He was most insistent that this is not a publicity endeavor. The dinner is private. Only 8 guests, including us." "Us?" I raised my eyebrows. "Naturally, you will accompany me?" "Naturally, I wouldn't miss seeing you leave the brownstone for anything less than a murder." Fritz was practically glowing. Monsieur Marchand's new sous chef was featured in Gourmet last month. They say she has revolutionized certain classical preparations. Wolfe grunted. "I have yet to see a revolution in cooking that improves upon mastery of fundamentals. Nevertheless, I have accepted. Archie, call him back and confirm." "Right away. Shall I arrange for a crane to lift you out the front door? Or will you be exiting under your own power?" He gave me a look. "Your humor deteriorates when you're hungry. Get lunch from Fritz and then make the call." I stood. "Any special instructions for Marchand?" "Yes. Tell him I will require the full description of ingredients and methods for the dish in question, not to review in advance. That would prejudice my response, but to take home afterward." "So you can have Fritz recreate it?" "Precisely. If it merits the attention, I wish to enjoy it without the distraction of leaving my home." I shook my head. Most people would consider dining at L'Apogee a once-in-a-lifetime treat, not a distraction. I am not most people, Archie. On that point, at least, there could be no argument. Over lunch, a veal dish with mushrooms that Fritz had been perfecting, Wolfe expanded on his decision. "While I find the disruption to my schedule vexing, the financial compensation makes it acceptable. Additionally, Marchand is reputed to source certain rare ingredients I have been curious about." "So it's all about the food? Nothing else intrigues you about this invitation?" Wolfe sipped his beer. "What else would there be?" "I don't know. Maybe the fact that one of New York's most acclaimed chefs is willing to pay thousands just for your opinion suggests something more than culinary curiosity." "Speculation without facts is pointless." "Sure," I said, spearing a piece of veal. "But my instincts say there's more to this dinner invitation than meets the eye." Wolfe didn't respond, but the slight narrowing of his eyes told me he'd had the same thought. Little did we know just how right we both were. Chapter 2. Death at the Table. I had seen Nero Wolfe leave the brownstone on West 35th Street exactly 17 times in the past year. I keep a log, and each departure was like watching a bear emerge from hibernation, reluctant, irritable, and fundamentally against the natural order of things. Wednesday evening was no exception. At 6:30 I brought the Heron sedan around front, while Wolfe stood in the hallway dressed in his one good black suit, examining his hat as if looking for flaws. "The forecast is clear," I said. "No need for an umbrella." "Humph." Wolfe placed the hat carefully on his head. "I do not base my preparations on forecasts. They are statistical probabilities, not certainties." "Like your chances of enjoying yourself tonight?" He ignored that, as I knew he would, and moved with careful deliberation down the 7 steps to the sidewalk. The car door was open, and he lowered himself into the passenger seat with the precision of someone handling nitroglycerin. "Do you have the address?" he asked, as if I might have forgotten the location of possibly the most talked-about restaurant in Manhattan. "Yes, sir, and we're 20 minutes early, which means we'll arrive exactly on time, accounting for traffic." He made a noise that might have been acknowledged. L'Apogée occupied the ground floor of a renovated building on East 53rd Street. Its facade was understated, just a discreet brass plaque beside a heavy oak door, but the 2 men in dark suits standing outside made it clear this wasn't just another Manhattan eatery. One of them stepped forward as I pulled up to the curb. "Mr. Wolfe, Mr. Goodwin, I'm Anthony Teller, Victor Marchand's nephew and partner. We're honored to have you." He was about my age, maybe early 40s, with the kind of tan you don't get in New York in April and hair that had been expertly cut to look casually disheveled. His handshake was firm, but not challenging, a businessman's shake. "Mr. Marchand is waiting inside. I'll show you in." The interior of L'Apogée was a study in restrained elegance. No white tablecloths or crystal chandeliers, instead dark wood tables, soft lighting, and walls lined with what looked like handcrafted oak panels. The dining room was empty except for a small group gathered at a round table in the center. Teller led us forward. "Uncle Victor, your guests of honor have arrived." Victor Marchand rose to greet us. He was shorter than I'd expected, maybe 5'6", with the compact build of someone who had spent decades moving efficiently around tight kitchens. His face was deeply lined, particularly around the eyes, but his gaze was sharp and assessing. "Mr. Wolfe." His accent was noticeable, but not thick. "This is indeed a privilege. I have followed your, shall we say, adventures for many years. Your reputation as a gourmand equals your fame as a detective." Wolfe inclined his head slightly. "Your establishment's reputation precedes it as well, Mr. Marchand." "Please, call me Victor. We are colleagues in the pursuit of excellence, no?" "As you wish." Marchand gestured to the others at the table. "Allow me to introduce my associates. You've met my nephew Anthony. This is Claude Benoit, my head chef for 15 years. Benoit was a large man with the florid complexion of someone who spends his life near heat and wine. He nodded curtly. "Martin Rousseau, my new sous chef, whose innovations you will experience tonight." Martin was perhaps 30, with close-cropped dark hair and intense eyes that evaluated us without pretense of social niceties. She offered a brief, professional smile. "And Philip Voss, our sommelier, who has selected tonight's pairings." Voss was thin and precise, with fastidious hands and a watch that probably cost more than most people's cars. His smile revealed perfect teeth, but didn't reach his eyes. "My wife Elaine sends her regrets," Marchand continued. "A migraine has confined her to bed. Please, be seated." Wolfe lowered himself into the chair Teller held for him, which I noted had been specially reinforced. Someone had done their homework. The first 2 courses were served with the kind of choreographed precision that comes from years of practice. Wolfe ate with his usual focused appreciation, occasionally making a small noise of approval. I enjoyed the food too, though I was more interested in watching the dynamics at the table. Benoit kept glancing at Martine with what might have been professional jealousy. Voss maintained a running commentary on each wine, his knowledge impressive, but his delivery somewhat rehearsed. Teller seemed more interested in Wolfe's reactions than in the food itself. As for Marchand, he watched Wolfe like a man waiting for a verdict. Before the main course, Marchand stood. "Tonight you will be the first outside my kitchen to experience what I believe is my crowning achievement. A dish that represents both tradition and innovation, the past and future of cuisine." He nodded to Martine, who disappeared into the kitchen. Moments later, she returned with 2 other staff members, each carrying covered plates. "I call it Heritage Reimagined," Marchand said, as the plates were set before us. "It begins with a base of—" The covers were removed simultaneously, revealing an artfully arranged composition centered around what appeared to be a perfectly seared piece of meat. "Duck breast from bird's eye sauce from a small farm in the Hudson Valley, aged for precisely 14 days. The sauce is a reduction of—" Wolfe was studying the dish with genuine interest, which for him was roughly equivalent to normal human excitement. Marchand paused mid-sentence. A strange expression crossed his face. "Victor!" Teller half rose from his chair. Marchand picked up his fork with trembling fingers and tasted the sauce. His eyes widened. "Non," he whispered. "The sauce, it's wrong." He clutched at his throat, his face contorting. Then he staggered sideways, colliding with a serving cart. I was on my feet instantly, moving toward him, but Benoit got there first, catching Marchand as he collapsed. "Get a doctor," Teller shouted. "I'm a doctor," said a man from another table, rushing over. "Put him on the floor. Give him space." The next few minutes were chaos. The doctor performed CPR while Martine called 911. Voss stood frozen, the wine bottle he'd been about to pour still in his hand. Teller kept repeating, "Uncle Victor, please, hold on." Wolfe remained seated, his face impassive, but his eyes missed nothing. The paramedics arrived in under 7 minutes. Impressive for Manhattan, but it was already too late. Victor Marchand was pronounced dead at the scene. And that's when Inspector Kramer walked in, cigar clamped between his teeth, looking like he'd just found a dead rat in his coffee. His eyes swept the room, stopping when they landed on us. "Wolfe," he said, removing the unlit cigar. "I might have known. Can't you go anywhere without someone dropping dead?" Wolfe's face remained impassive. "Good evening, Inspector. I assure you my presence here is merely coincidental." "Coincidental?" Kramer repeated the word like it tasted bad. "You just happened to be at the exact table where a man keels over and dies. I was invited as a guest to evaluate a new dish." "Sure you were?" Kramer turned to me. "Goodwin, don't leave town." "Wouldn't dream of it," I said. "Though technically, this looks like natural causes. Heart attack, maybe." "I'll let the medical examiner make that call." Kramer nodded to the uniformed officers who had followed him in. "Take statements from everyone. Nobody leaves until I say so." Over the next 2 hours, we all gave our statements. Wolfe was uncharacteristically cooperative, describing the evening's events with precision, but offering no theories. I watched the kitchen staff hovering in a tight group, Martine occasionally placing a comforting hand on Benoit's shoulder. Teller was on his phone, speaking in hushed tones, probably to Marchand's wife. Voss had retreated to the wine cellar, emerging with red-rimmed eyes. Finally, Kramer let us go. As we drove home in silence, I glanced at Wolfe. "Well, any thoughts?" "Many," he said, "but speculation without adequate information is irresponsible." His last words were about the sauce being wrong, seemed significant coming from a chef of his caliber. Wolfe's eyes narrowed slightly. "Indeed? Think Kramer will call it natural causes?" "That is not for us to determine, Archie." He stared out the window at the passing city lights. We were witnesses, nothing more. But I knew that tone, and I knew we had not seen the last of l'apogée or the mystery of Victor Marchand's final dinner. Chapter 3. A client arrives. 3 days after the debacle at l'apogée, life at the brownstone had returned to its usual routine. Wolfe was in the plant rooms with Theodore. I had finished typing the final report on the Harmonson case, and Fritz was preparing lunch, a bouillabaisse that had been filling the house with enticing aromas since mid-morning. I was entering the payment from the Harmonson settlement in the cash book when the doorbell rang. The front door is my responsibility, like almost everything else that requires leaving a chair, so I went to answer it. The woman on the doorstep was dressed entirely in black, her pale face a stark contrast to her dark clothing. She was perhaps 40, with the kind of beauty that comes from good bones rather than fashion magazines, regal rather than pretty. Her composure was impressive, but the slight redness around her eyes told me she'd been crying recently. "I'm Elaine Marchand," she said. "I need to see Nero Wolfe." I recognized the name immediately. "Mrs. Marchand, please come in. My name is Archie Goodwin." "Yes, I know who you are." Her voice had the same hint of accent as her late husband's. "You were there when Victor died." I led her to the office and seated her in the red leather chair, the one Wolfe keeps for clients or important visitors. It was 11:27, which meant Wolfe would be down from the plant rooms in exactly 3 minutes. I offered her refreshment, which she declined with a small shake of her head. "Mr. Wolfe will be with you shortly," I told her, settling behind my desk. "He's very punctual." She nodded absently, her gloved fingers twisting a ring through the fabric. Up close, I could see that despite her composed exterior, she was wound tight enough to snap. At 11:30 on the dot, the sound of the elevator announced Wolfe's descent. He entered the office, nodded to our visitor, and settled his bulk behind his desk. "Mrs. Marchand," he said, "my condolences on your loss." "Thank you for seeing me." She straightened in her chair. "I'll come directly to the point. I believe my husband was murdered, and I want to hire you to prove it." Wolfe raised his eyebrows a fraction of an inch. "The medical examiner has issued a finding. Yes, natural causes, a heart attack." Her mouth twisted. "It's absurd. Victor was in perfect health." I had my notebook out, pencil ready. Wolfe's eyes flicked to me, then back to Mrs. Marchand. "Perfect health is rarely an accurate assessment for a man of 65, he said. Victor was 62. She leaned forward. "And while he wasn't an athlete, he had the stamina of a man 20 years younger. The doctors had always said his heart was strong." "I see. What leads you to suspect foul play?" She opened her handbag and removed an envelope, which she placed on Wolfe's desk. "This is a retainer, $20,000. Will that be sufficient to secure your services?" Wolfe didn't touch the envelope. "That depends on the services required, Mrs. Marchand. And you haven't answered my question." She took a deep breath. Victor had been experiencing some health issues for the past few months. Nothing serious, some digestive discomfort, occasional dizziness, fatigue. His doctors said it was stress and age, but Victor wasn't convinced. Did he consult a specialist? 2, actually. Neither found anything conclusive. The symptoms would come and go, but the last few weeks he seemed better. She paused. "Mr. Wolfe, do you know why my husband invited you to that dinner?" "He wanted my opinion on a new dish." "Yes, but why you specifically?" She didn't wait for an answer. "Because he suspected something was wrong at the restaurant." "He wouldn't tell me details. He said it was better if I didn't know in case he was mistaken. But he trusted your palate and your discretion." I made a note of that. Wolfe's lips pushed out slightly and then back in. a sign he was interested. "You believe this suspicion it was connected to his death?" "I'm certain of it." Her composure cracked slightly. His last words were about the source being wrong. Victor would never serve anything imperfect, especially not to someone like you. Wolfe nodded. "Mrs. Marchand, tell me about the relationships among the staff at L'Apogée." She seemed surprised by the shift in questioning, but recovered quickly. "Claude Benoit has been with Victor for 15 years. He's brilliant but temperamental, traditional to his core." She frowned slightly. "He wasn't happy when Victor hired Martine Rousseau 6 months ago. She's young, innovative. Victor was tremendously excited about her ideas." "And the nephew? Anthony Teller?" "Anthony joined the business side 3 years ago. He handles the finances, marketing, reservations, everything that isn't cooking. Victor was never interested in that part of the business." "Does Mr. Teller have an ownership stake?" She hesitated. "Victor made him a junior partner last year. 10%. In his will, Anthony receives another 15%. I retain controlling interest." "And the sommelier, Philip Voss?" "He's been with us for about 2 years. Came with excellent references from several Michelin-starred restaurants in Europe. Victor was pleased with his work. Our wine sales have increased significantly under his management." Wolfe's eyes narrowed slightly. "Were you aware of any conflicts among them, beyond the professional tension between Mr. Benoit and Ms. Rousseau?" Mrs. Marchand twisted her ring again. "There have been irregularities in the wine cellar inventory. Victor mentioned it about a month ago. Some of our most valuable bottles were missing with no record of sale." "Did he confront Mr. Voss?" "He was gathering evidence first. Victor was methodical that way." Her voice caught. "He kept detailed records of everything in his office at the restaurant." Wolfe leaned back in his chair. "Mrs. Marchand, have the police examined these records?" "They haven't looked at anything. They accepted the medical examiner's finding and closed the case." Her voice hardened. "They spent more time questioning why you were there than investigating Victor's death." I suppressed a smile. Inspector Kramer's suspicion of Wolfe's involvement in any unexpected death was practically a tradition in New York homicide. "I see." Wolfe studied her for a moment. "One final question. Did your husband keep any personal items at the restaurant? Items that only he would use?" She looked startled. "Yes, actually. Victor was particular about certain ingredients. He imported olive oil from a small producer in Provence, had it bottled specially for him. He used it daily and kept it in his private office. He also had his own set of knives, of course, and some herbs he grew himself in a small greenhouse behind the restaurant." Wolfe nodded and reached for the envelope on his desk. "I will need access to the restaurant, Mr. Marchand's office, and his medical records." Hope flashed across her face. "Then you'll take the case?" "Yes." Wolfe opened the envelope and counted the bills inside. "My fee is quite high, Mrs. Marchand. This will serve as a retainer for 1 week. I charge expenses extra." "Money is no object, Mr. Wolfe. I want justice for Victor." "Justice is rarely simple, Mrs. Marchand." Wolfe rang for beer. "Archie will handle the details." I escorted her out after taking her contact information and promising to be in touch soon. When I returned to the office, Wolfe was pouring beer with his usual precision. "Interesting," I said, sitting down at my desk. "Marchand suspected something was wrong at the restaurant and invited you specifically because of it. Then drops dead at your table after declaring the sauce was wrong. Either that's one hell of a coincidence, or someone at that table had a reason to want him quiet." Wolfe took a sip of beer. "Your fondness for dramatic oversimplification is showing, Archie. We have insufficient information to form any conclusions. But you took the case and 20,000 of her dollars." "Indeed, Mrs. Marchand believes her husband was murdered. She may be correct. Where do you want me to start? The restaurant? The medical records? Wolfe placed his empty glass on his desk. First, contact Saul. I have a special assignment for him. Then yes, the restaurant. Observe the dynamics among the staff. Pay particular attention to their reactions when you mention Marchand's final words. You think the source really was wrong? Wolfe's expression didn't change, but his eyes had that look. The one that meant he was seeing connections I hadn't yet made. Victor Marchand was a chef of exceptional talent and experience, he said finally. If he claimed the source was wrong, I am inclined to believe him. The implications of that hung in the air between us as Fritz announced that lunch was ready. Chapter 4. Kitchen Politics. On Thursday morning I dressed with particular care. Charcoal suit, blue tie with subtle pattern, polished Oxfords. If I was going to infiltrate one of Manhattan's most prestigious restaurants, I'd as well look the part. Not that I was technically infiltrating. Elaine Marchand had called ahead to let them know I would be stopping by with her authorization. When I came downstairs, Wolfe was in the office reviewing some correspondence that Fritz had brought in with his breakfast. I'll be heading to L'Apogée, I said, straightening my cuffs. Anything specific you want me to look for beyond what we discussed? Wolfe glanced up from his letter. Yes. Inquire whether Mr. Marchand had any special dietary habits or restrictions, and determine who else might have used his private olive oil. You think the oil might be important? I make no assumptions at this juncture. Sure, I picked up my hat. Did Saul call back? He did. He will begin his assignment this morning. Care to share what that assignment is? Wolfe returned to his letter. In due time, Archie. I left him to his correspondence and headed out. The morning was crisp, hinting at the warmth that would arrive later in the day. I took a cab to L'Apogée, which looked different in daylight, less mysterious, more businesslike. A handwritten sign on the door announced they were closed until further notice, but when I knocked, a young man in kitchen whites opened up. Sorry, we're closed, he began, then noticed my attire. Oh, are you Mr. Goodwin? Mrs. Marchand said you'd be coming by? That's right. I'm Jake, one of the line cooks. Mr. Teller asked me to watch for you. They're all in the main dining room. He led me through the empty restaurant where the staff had gathered around one of the larger tables. Anthony Teller sat at the head, his immaculate suit a stark contrast to the kitchen uniforms of the others. Claude Benoit's massive frame dominated one side of the table, Martine Rousseau beside him, her expression unreadable. Philip Voss sat opposite them examining a spreadsheet. Teller rose when he saw me. Mr. Goodwin, thank you for coming. I hope you understand that this is a difficult time for all of us. Of course, I appreciate you making time, I said, shaking his hand. Mrs. Marchand has asked us to look into a few details surrounding her husband's death. There's nothing to look into, Benoit said gruffly, his French accent more pronounced than I remembered. Victor had a heart attack, a tragedy but not a mystery. Chef, Teller said with a warning tone, before turning back to me. We're cooperating fully with Mrs. Marchand's wishes, although we agree with the medical examiner's finding. Please, have a seat. I sat next to Voss, who slid his spreadsheet aside and gave me a thin smile. I'm not sure how we can help, but we'll try. I'd like to speak with each of you individually, I said. And I'd also like to see Mr. Marchand's office. Teller nodded. Of course. I can show you his office now, and then you can use it for your interviews if you'd like. We were just discussing the reopening schedule. When do you plan to reopen? I asked. Next week, Martine spoke for the first time, her voice calm but determined. Victor would have wanted that. Benoit made a dismissive noise. You barely knew him 6 months, and now you speak for what he would want. Chef Benoit, Teller interjected. We've already agreed on this. The tension around the table was thick enough to slice. I noted how Martine kept her gaze steady on Benoit, who refused to look at her. Teller stood. Let me show you Victor's office, Mr. Goodwin. Then perhaps you'd like to start with me. I followed him to a door at the back of the restaurant. It opened into a small but elegantly appointed space with a desk, bookshelves filled with cookbooks, and a small refrigerator in the corner. Victor preferred to handle certain things personally, Teller explained, indicating the desk. His records are all there. The computer's password is taped to the bottom of the keyboard. He was always forgetting it. Thanks. I'd like a moment alone to get my bearings, if you don't mind. Of course, I'll wait outside. After he left, I took a quick inventory of the office. The desk contained meticulous records, invoices, employee files, menu drafts. A framed photo showed Marchand with Elaine in what looked like the south of France. The refrigerator contained several bottles of water and a distinctive dark glass bottle labelled in French, the olive oil, presumably. I closed the refrigerator and called Teller back in. He settled into the chair opposite the desk, looking perfectly at ease. How long have you worked with your uncle? I began. 3 years in the business, but I've been involved with the restaurant peripherally my whole life. Victor was like a father to me after my parents divorced. And he recently made you a partner? A flicker of surprise crossed his face. Yes, a 10% stake. He was transitioning toward retirement, grooming me to eventually take over the business end. What can you tell me about the working relationship between Chef Benoit and Martine Rousseau? Teller hesitated. Claude is traditional. He's been Victor's right hand for 15 years. When Victor brought Martine in with her modern techniques and ideas, it created some friction. Bad enough that Benoit might want to leave. Claude threatened to quit twice, but Victor always talked him down. Teller leaned forward. Look, in a kitchen like this, tensions run high, it's normal. But everyone respected Victor. Mrs. Marchand mentioned some irregularities with the wine inventory. His expression tightened almost imperceptibly. Minor discrepancies. We were addressing them. Were you aware that Victor suspected something was wrong at the restaurant? Something serious enough that he invited Nero Wolfe specifically to investigate? Teller's face showed genuine surprise. That's absurd. Victor invited Mr. Wolfe because he's a legendary gourmet. He wanted validation for his new dish from someone whose palate he respected. His last words were, "The sauce was wrong." What do you make of that? He was dying, Mr. Goodwin. People say strange things in their final moments. But for a chef of his caliber, wouldn't that be significant? Teller shrugged. Victor was a perfectionist. Perhaps he tasted something off in that moment. Claude supervised that sauce. You might ask him. I made some notes, then thanked him and asked for Benoit to be sent in next. The head chef entered like a thundercloud, his large frame seeming to fill the small office. He remained standing, arms crossed. I have preparations to make if we're reopening next week, he said without preamble. This won't take long, I assured him. How long did you work with Victor Marchand? 15 years, 2 months, 6 days. His voice was gruff, but held a note of pride. You prepared the sauce for the dish served at Mr. Wolfe's dinner? His eyes narrowed. Yes, it was perfect. Mr. Marchand's last words were, the sauce was wrong. Does that mean anything to you? A flash of something, anger, concern, crossed his face. Impossible. I made it exactly to his specifications. Did anyone else handle it before service? I supervised everything myself. He leaned forward. Victor was my friend, not just my boss. You think I would serve him something substandard? People make mistakes. Not with that sauce, not with Victor's signature dish. He straightened. Are we finished? I asked a few more questions about Marchand's health and eating habits, learning that the chef had indeed been complaining of stomach issues and fatigue for months. Then I requested Rousseau be sent in. Martine Rousseau entered with quiet confidence, her chef's whites immaculate despite the morning's work. She sat with perfect posture, hands folded in her lap. Ms. Rousseau, you joined L'Apogée 6 months ago. What was your relationship with Victor Marchand? Professional, she said simply. He hired me for my innovative approach. I respected him enormously. And your relationship with Chef Benoit? A small, tight smile. Claude is a traditionalist. He sees my methods as challenging, but we are professionals. Were you involved in preparing the dish served at Mr. Wolfe's dinner? Number that was Victor's creation with Claude. I was working on other projects with Victor, but not that particular dish. What kind of projects? Her eyes lit up with genuine passion. A cookbook. Victor was planning to publish his techniques alongside my modern interpretations, a dialogue between traditional and contemporary cuisine. She paused. It would have been revolutionary. I made a note of that. Did you notice anything unusual about Mr. Marchand in the days before his death? She considered this carefully. He was preoccupied, checking his records frequently. He spent more time than usual in his office. Any idea what he was looking for? Number, but he was concerned about something. After she left, Philip Voss entered. The sommelier perched on the edge of the chair, his movements precise and controlled. Mr. Voss, I understand there were some discrepancies in the wine cellar inventory. He didn't blink. Minor accounting errors. Common in restaurants with extensive collections like ours. Did Mr. Marchand discuss these discrepancies with you directly? Did you select the wines for the dinner Mr. Wolfe attended? Yes. Each pairing was chosen to complement the specific flavors of Victor's menu. I asked him about Marchand's health and habits, getting similar responses to the others. As he left, I noticed his hand trembling slightly, the first crack in his composed facade. Alone again, I examined Marchand's computer, finding meticulously organized files. In a folder labeled Inventory Discrepancies, I discovered spreadsheets tracking missing wines, bottles valued at over $100,000 in total. Another folder contained notes on the cookbook project with Martine, showing genuine excitement about the collaboration. In the refrigerator, I carefully examined the olive oil bottle. The label indicated it came from a small producer in Provence and was bottled specifically for Marchand. I made a note of the name and address. Before leaving, I called Wolfe from Marchand's phone. I'm still at the restaurant, I told him. Interesting dynamics here. Benoit resents Rousseau's influence, Teller's set to inherit more of the business, and Voss is nervous about those missing wines, which are worth a small fortune, by the way. And the olive oil, Wolfe asked. Private stock imported from Provence, custom bottled for Marchand. Did anyone else use it? According to everyone I asked, no, it was his personal supply. He used it daily. Bring a sample, Wolfe instructed. And Archie? Observe who watches you take it. I hung up, suddenly understanding Wolfe's interest in the oil. Carefully, I removed the bottle from the refrigerator and placed it in my briefcase. As I left the office, I noticed Philip Voss watching me from across the dining room, his expression unreadable. Chapter 5. Liquid Assets. I arrived back at the brownstone a little after 2, which meant Wolfe would be in the plant rooms with Theodore until 4. That gave me time to type up my notes from the morning's interviews and do some additional research. The bottle of olive oil from Marchand's office sat on my desk while I worked. It was an elegant container, dark green glass with a hand-lettered label in French, that identified it as a first cold press from a single estate in Provence. The sort of thing that likely cost more per ounce than most people's dinner wine. At 4 o'clock, Wolfe descended from the plant rooms. He settled behind his desk, rang for beer, and then examined the olive oil bottle without touching it. "Your report, Archie." I handed him my typed notes and summarized my impressions of each interview while he read. Benoit was defensive about the source. Rousseau was cool as a cucumber, but clearly had ambitions. Teller seemed genuinely surprised by the suggestion his uncle suspected something was wrong, and Voss got nervous when I brought up the missing wines. Wolfe grunted. "Describe this nervousness." "Subtle." Maintained his composure, but his hand trembled when he was leaving, and he was watching when I took the oil bottle. "Interesting." Wolfe finally picked up the olive oil, examining the label. "You confirmed this was Mr. Marchand's personal supply?" "Yes. According to everyone I talked to, nobody else used it. He kept it in his private office refrigerator and used it daily." Wolfe carefully set the bottle down. "I'm sending it to be analyzed. Please arrange for a courier to take it to Dr. Vollmer immediately." "You think it's connected to his health issues?" "It's a possibility worth exploring." Wolfe took a sip of beer. "What did you learn about the missing wines?" "Based on Marchand's records, bottles worth over $100,000 have disappeared in the past year. All high-end stuff from their reserve cellar. No sales records, just gone." "Did Mr. Marchand confront Mr. Voss directly?" "Doesn't look like it. His notes suggest he was still gathering evidence. He was meticulous, kept spreadsheets tracking every discrepancy." Wolfe nodded. "Your next step is to focus on the wine situation. I want a complete picture of how those bottles could have disappeared. Who has access to the cellar? What security measures are in place? And where those wines might have gone." "You think the missing wines are connected to Marchand's death?" "I think $100,000 is motive enough for many crimes." Wolfe's eyes narrowed slightly. "Call Mrs. Marchand. I want to know if her husband took any of the olive oil home for personal use." After arranging for the courier and making the call to Elaine Marchand, who confirmed Victor never brought his special oil home, preferring to keep it at the restaurant exclusively, I headed back to La Pogée. This time I arrived during pre-dinner preparation, when the kitchen would be at its most active. My goal was to catch Philip Voss in his natural habitat, the wine cellar. Anthony Teller intercepted me near the entrance. "Mr. Goodwin, we weren't expecting you back so soon." "Just a few follow-up questions," I said easily. "I'm particularly interested in the wine cellar. I understand it's quite impressive." A flicker of concern, crossed his face. "It is. One of the best collections in the city. Philip can give you a tour if he's not too busy. Let me check." He disappeared into the kitchen area, and I took the opportunity to observe the pre-service bustle. Despite their chef's death just days earlier, the staff moved with practiced efficiency. Benoit barked orders in a mixture of French and English, while Martine worked at a separate station, her focus absolute as she arranged something delicate on small plates. Teller returned with Voss, who looked less than thrilled to see me again. "Mr. Goodwin wants to see the wine cellar," Teller explained. "Could you spare a few minutes to show him around?" "Of course," Voss said, his professional smile firmly in place. "This way, please." He led me down a narrow staircase to a temperature-controlled room lined with wooden racks. The lighting was subdued, the air cool and slightly humid. Bottles lay in ordered rows, their labels facing outward. "Impressive," I said, genuinely meaning it. "How many bottles do you have down here?" "Currently 2,874, Voss replied promptly, ranging from accessible options for our regular menu to rare vintages for special occasions or serious collectors. I whistled softly. Must be a challenge keeping track of all of them. We have a detailed inventory system. He gestured to a tablet mounted on the wall. Everything is catalogued electronically as well as in physical logs. Yet bottles went missing. His smile tightened. As I explained earlier, there were some discrepancies in the record-keeping, common in an operation of this size. $100,000 worth of common discrepancies? I kept my tone conversational, but his eyes widened slightly. I'm not sure where you got that figure. From Victor Marchand's detailed records, I said. He was tracking every missing bottle. Voss's composure slipped for just a moment before he recovered. Mr. Marchand was sometimes confused about the inventory. He wasn't as familiar with the new electronic system. Seems strange for such a meticulous man. I moved further into the cellar, examining the storage areas. Who has access to this room? Myself, of course. Mr. Teller has the code. Chef Benoit as well, though he rarely comes down here. Anyone else? He hesitated. Mr. Marchand, obviously. And there's a master code that some of the senior staff know for emergencies. So, potentially quite a few people could access these bottles. Access, yes, but knowledge of which bottles are valuable enough to steal, that requires expertise. Voss straightened his already perfect tie. Mr. Goodwin, I'm not sure what you're implying, but... I'm not implying anything, Mr. Voss. Just trying to understand how bottles worth thousands could disappear without anyone noticing until Mr. Marchand started tracking them. He didn't have a good answer for that. After pressing him on a few more details about the inventory system and security measures, I let him return to his pre-service duties, but not before I noticed how his eyes kept drifting to an unmarked door at the far end of the cellar. Once he was gone, I examined the door more closely. It was locked with a keypad similar to the one at the cellar entrance. On a hunch, I tried the master code that Voss had reluctantly shared when I asked about emergency access procedures. The lock clicked open. Inside was a small room with a desk, computer, and several empty wooden wine crates. The computer was locked, but a notebook beside it contained handwritten entries, dates, bottle descriptions, and amounts. The most recent entry was from 3 days before Marchand's death. I photographed several pages with my phone before carefully returning the notebook to its exact position. Then I locked the room and headed back upstairs. In the kitchen I found Martine, alone at her station, focused on intricate plating technique. Ms. Rousseau, I said, I was hoping to ask you about the cookbook you were developing with Mr. Marchand. She looked up, her concentration broken. What about it? How far along was the project? We had completed the outline and about 30 recipes. Her expression softened slightly. Victor was excited about it. He said it would be his legacy, traditional techniques meeting modern innovation. Where are the materials now? In his office computer, I assume, and I have copies of my contributions. She returned to her plating. Why do you ask? Just trying to understand all the projects Marchand was involved in, I said casually. By the way, did you ever notice anything unusual about his health in recent months? Her hands paused briefly. He sometimes mentioned stomach discomfort. Occasionally he seemed tired, but he was 62 and worked 14-hour days. It didn't seem abnormal. Did he ever discuss the missing wine bottles with you? Her eyes flicked up, surprise evident. Wine bottles? Number that would have been between him and Philip. I thanked her and left her to her work, making one final stop at Marchand's office to copy some files from his computer onto a flash drive I'd brought along. As I was leaving, I nearly collided with Teller in the hallway. "Find everything you needed?" he asked, his tone friendly but his eyes watchful. "For now." I slipped the flash drive into my pocket. "You've all been very helpful." "We want to put this behind us, Mr. Goodwin." The restaurant was Victor's life. The best way to honor him is to ensure it continues to thrive. I nodded and headed out, but not before noticing Philip Voss watching me from across the dining room, his phone pressed to his ear, speaking rapidly to someone. When I returned to the brownstone, Wolfe was in the middle of dinner. I waited until he and Fritz had finished serving the main course before reporting my findings. The wine inventory system has enough holes to drive a truck through, I concluded, and I found what looks like a separate set of records in a hidden room off the wine cellar. Based on the entries, someone's been selling bottles off books for at least 6 months. Wolfe dabbed his lips with his napkin. And Mr. Voss's reaction when you mentioned the value of the missing wines? Definite alarm. He didn't know Marchand had calculated the total. Interesting. Wolfe took a sip of water. Saul called while you were out. He has made contact with 3 specialty food importers who supplied Mr. Marchand. He will report his findings tomorrow. You think the olive oil is significant? Wolfe didn't answer directly. Dr. Vollmer will have preliminary results in the morning. Until then, speculation would be premature. But the way he returned to his dinner with slightly more focus than usual told me he was already assembling pieces of the puzzle in his mind. Chapter 6. Matters of Health. Friday morning brought a call from Dr. Vollmer regarding the olive oil analysis. Wolfe took it in the office while I sat at my desk, pretending not to eavesdrop, but catching enough one-sided phrases to know the results were significant. Wolfe's eyebrows rose a fraction of an inch several times, for him, the equivalent of jumping out of his chair in shock. When he hung up, he sat back and pressed his fingertips together. "Well," I prompted. "The oil contains trace amounts of a metallic compound," he said. "Not immediately toxic in small doses, but cumulatively dangerous with regular consumption over time." "Poison," I said. "Someone was poisoning Marchand through his personal olive oil." "It appears so. Dr. Vollmer is conducting additional tests to identify the precise compound, but his preliminary findings suggest a substance that would produce symptoms consistent with Mrs. Marchand's description of her husband's health issues. Digestive problems, fatigue, dizziness, I recalled. But if the plan was to poison him slowly, why did he die suddenly at the dinner? That remains unclear. Wolfe reached for his current book, but didn't open it, a sign he was deep in thought. We need Mr. Marchand's complete medical records, and I want more information on his final meal. The source that was wrong may be the key. I'll get on the medical records, I said, reaching for the phone. Mrs. Marchand can authorize the release. One more thing, Archie. Contact Inspector Kramer. Inquire if the medical examiner conducted a toxicology report. I raised my eyebrows. You want me to call Kramer voluntarily? Are you feeling all right? Your attempts at humor often fall flat when time is of the essence, Wolfe said, finally opening his book. I made the necessary calls. Elaine Marchand promptly authorized her husband's medical records, and I arranged to pick them up that afternoon. Inspector Kramer was less accommodating. "What's your angle, Goodwin?" he demanded after I asked about the toxicology report. "Wolfe doesn't make social calls to the NYPD. Mrs. Marchand hired us to investigate her husband's death," I explained. "She doesn't believe it was natural causes." "Of course she doesn't," Kramer growled. "Nobody wants to believe their loved one just dropped dead, but that's what the ME determined." "Was a toxicology screen done?" A pause. "Routine panels only, nothing unusual found." "Did those panels include tests for cumulative metal poisoning?" A longer pause. "I'll look into it. Don't leave town." "Wouldn't dream of it," I assured him before hanging up. At noon, Saul Panzer arrived, a small, unassuming man with a nose that had been broken at least once. Saul was Wolfe's top operative and charged accordingly. If Wolfe had sent him to investigate the specialty food importers, it meant that angle was particularly important. "Come in, Saul," Wolfe greeted him. "Report." Saul took the red leather chair and didn't waste time on preliminaries. "I've checked the 3 importers that supplied Marchand's specialty ingredients. 2 are completely legitimate operations with impeccable records. The third, Provence Direct, has some interesting characteristics." He removed a small notebook from his pocket. "They've been supplying Marchand's olive oil for approximately 18 months. Small operation, exclusive clientele, premium prices. The interesting part is their ownership structure. On paper, they're owned by a holding company registered in Delaware, but with some digging, I traced it back to a silent partner who owns 40%. "And that partner is?" Wolfe prompted. "Anthony Teller." I whistled softly. "Marchand's nephew has a hidden stake in the company that supplies his uncle's personal olive oil. That's quite a coincidence." "Indeed," Wolfe agreed. "Did you obtain a sample of the oil directly from the importer?" Saul produced a small bottle identical to the one I'd taken from Marchand's office. "Same batch, according to their records. I also learned that the arrangement was set up so that all of Marchand's oil came through a dedicated bottling process, separate from their other clients." "Meaning it could be doctored without affecting their other customers?" I said. "Precisely." Saul glanced at his notebook again. "One more thing. I made contact with a sommelier at Le Bernardin who knows Philip Voss. Apparently Voss has been offering rare wines to private collectors at competitive prices, wines that match the description of some missing from Lapogé's cellar." Wolfe nodded. "Satisfactory, Saul. I have another assignment for you. I want you to observe Lapogé this evening, particularly the comings and goings of Mr. Voss. Note anyone he meets outside of regular business." After Saul left, I headed to Dr. Milton Greaves' office on Park Avenue to collect Marchand's medical records. Dr. Greaves was a distinguished-looking man with silver hair and the confident manner of someone who treats patients wealthy enough to never question his bills. "Mrs. Marchand called ahead," he said, handing me a thick folder. "Although I must say I find this irregular. The medical examiner already reviewed these records and found nothing suspicious." "We're just being thorough," I replied. "Did you treat Mr. Marchand for his recent health complaints?" Dr. Greaves frowned slightly. "Yes, he had been experiencing episodic gastrointestinal distress, fatigue, and occasional dizziness for approximately 6 months. Given his age and profession, the stress of running a high-end restaurant, late hours, rich food, the symptoms weren't especially alarming." "Did you consider poison?" I asked bluntly. His eyebrows shot up. "Poison? Certainly not. What possible reason would I have to suspect poisoning?" "Just asking." I flipped through the folder. "I see you referred him to specialists." "Yes, a gastroenterologist and later a neurologist. Neither found anything conclusive. The working theory was stress-related issues, possibly early signs of an ulcer, perhaps mild anemia. We were monitoring and treating symptomatically." He paused. "Mr. Goodwin, if you're suggesting I missed something—" "Not at all," I assured him. "One more question. Did Mr. Marchand ever mention concerns about his restaurant's staff issues, anything like that during his visits?" Dr. Greaves considered this. "He did mention some business stress, something about inventory problems and staff tensions. Nothing specific. Doctor-patient conversations tend to be general about such matters." I thanked him and took the records back to the brownstone, where Wolfe was enjoying his lunch. I left the folder on his desk and went to the kitchen, where Fritz prepared me a sandwich while I filled him in on Dr. Greaves. After lunch, I pored over Marchand's medical records while Wolfe read his book. The symptoms had indeed started about 6 months ago, around the time Martine Rousseau joined the restaurant. They were mild at first, but had gradually increased in frequency and severity, with a notable uptick around 3 months ago. Interestingly, there was a gap in the symptoms for about 2 weeks in March, when Marchand had been travelling in France. He got better when he was away from the restaurant, I noted. Then the symptoms returned when he came back. Suggesting the source of the poison was at the restaurant, not in his home, Wolfe agreed. What else? The neurologist noted subtle signs of peripheral nerve damage consistent with certain heavy metal exposures, but since there was no obvious source, he didn't pursue that diagnosis. Wolfe nodded. And the final meal? Have you learned anything about the source that was wrong? Not yet. I thought I'd go back to the restaurant and talk to Benoit directly about it. Do so, but first we need more information about Mr. Teller. His hidden ownership of the oil import company is highly suggestive. I spent the next hour making calls and checking online databases. Anthony Teller had a complicated financial picture. Significant gambling debts at several casinos in Atlantic City and Las Vegas, a mortgage on a Hamptons house that seemed beyond his apparent means, and a recent divorce settlement that had cost him considerably. Teller needs money, I summarized for Wolfe. He stands to inherit more of the restaurant now that Marchand is dead, and he secretly owns part of the company that supplied the poisoned oil. Yet we cannot discount Mr. Voss, Wolfe reminded me. The wine theft represents a significant sum, and Mr. Marchand was investigating it. Could they be working together? Teller poisons his uncle, Voss steals the wine. They both benefit. Possible, but complex. Partnerships in crime are inherently unstable. The phone rang, and I answered to find Inspector Kramer on the line, sounding even more irritable than usual. Goodwin, I want you and Wolfe at the precinct, now. What's the occasion? Are you finally admitting you need our help? I'm admitting nothing, he snapped. The ME found evidence of heavy metal poisoning in Marchand's tissue samples. We've reopened the case as a possible homicide. I covered the mouthpiece. Kramer says they found poison in Marchand's tissues. They're treating it as homicide now. Wolfe sighed. Tell him we'll cooperate fully, but I cannot leave the brownstone until tomorrow at the earliest. Invite him here if he wishes to consult. I relayed the message, which produced a stream of colourful language from Kramer about Wolfe's stubbornness. Eventually he agreed to send Sergeant Pearlie Stebbins to take our statements. Also, I added before he could hang up, you might want to take a close look at Marchand's personal olive oil and the company that supplied it, and the wine cellar inventory at l'Apogee. Just friendly suggestions? I don't need suggestions from you, Goodwin, Kramer growled, but I could tell he was making notes. Pearlie will be there in an hour. Don't go anywhere. When I hung up, Wolfe was looking at me with something close to approval. Well handled, Archie. We now have the official investigation moving in useful directions without revealing all our information. Thanks. Should I still go talk to Benoit about the source? Yes, but after Sergeant Stebbins takes our statements, we must appear fully cooperative. The pieces were coming together, but something still bothered me. If someone was poisoning Marchand slowly through the oil, why did he suddenly die at that dinner? What changed? Wolfe's eyes narrowed slightly. Indeed, that is the question that remains to be answered. Chapter 7. Bottled Suspicions. Sergeant Pearlie Stebbins arrived at the brownstone precisely on time, which is one of his few redeeming qualities. He's a solid, square-built man with a face that always looks like he's just bitten into something sour, especially when dealing with me. Goodwin, he greeted me at the door. Let's get this over with. Always a pleasure, Pearlie, I replied, leading him to the office. Can I get you anything? Coffee? Beer? A personality transplant? He ignored that and settled into the red leather chair, notebook ready. Wolfe acknowledged him with a slight nod. "Sergeant, I understand Inspector Kramer wishes to take our statements regarding Victor Marchand's death." "That's right." Pearlie's pencil was poised. "Start with why you were at the restaurant that night." "Mr. Marchand invited me," Wolfe said simply. "He wished for my opinion on a new dish he had created." "Just like that? He calls up Nero Wolfe, who famously hates to leave his house, and you agree to come to dinner?" "He offered my usual fee plus expenses," Wolfe replied, "and I have a professional interest in fine cuisine." Pearlie looked skeptical, but moved on, taking us through the events of the evening in meticulous detail. When he reached Marchand's collapse, he focused particularly on the chef's final words. "He said, 'The sauce is wrong,'" Pearlie confirmed. "His exact words were, 'The sauce was wrong,'" Wolfe corrected. "A small but potentially significant distinction." "What do you think he meant by that?" "I have insufficient data to form a conclusion at this time." Pearlie turned to me. "And what have you been doing at the restaurant since then, Goodwin?" "We know you've been nosing around." "Mrs. Marchand hired us to investigate her husband's death," I explained. "I've been interviewing staff and reviewing Mr. Marchand's records with the full cooperation of management." "Found anything worth sharing with the actual police?" I glanced at Wolfe, who gave a slight nod. "We believe Mr. Marchand was being poisoned through his personal olive oil, which he kept in his office refrigerator and used daily. We sent a sample to Dr. Vollmer for analysis, and he confirmed it contains a toxic metallic compound." Pearlie's eyebrows shot up. "And you didn't think to tell us this immediately?" "We're telling you now," I pointed out. "We also learned that Anthony Teller, Marchand's nephew, secretly owns 40% of the company that supplies that olive oil, and the sommelier, Philip Voss, has been selling rare wines that match descriptions of bottles missing from the restaurant cellar." Pearlie scribbled furiously. "Anything else you've been keeping to yourselves?" "We've withheld nothing of substance," Wolfe said. "However, I would appreciate being kept informed of the official investigation's progress, particularly regarding any toxicology findings." Pearlie snorted. "Yeah, I'm sure Kramer will rush right over to brief you personally." But he did share that the medical examiner had found elevated levels of a heavy metal in Marchand's tissue samples, consistent with chronic exposure over several months. The ME was conducting additional tests to determine if a higher dose had been administered recently. After Pearlie left with our statements and copies of the relevant documents we'd collected, I turned to Wolfe. "Now what?" "Now we complete the picture." Wolfe pressed the buzzer 3 times for Fritz. "I need to speak with Fred Durkin. See if he's available immediately." Fred arrived within the hour, his broad face eager for assignment. Unlike Saul, Fred isn't brilliant, but he's reliable and thorough, perfect for surveillance work that doesn't require subtle thinking. "Fred, I want you to monitor deliveries at l'Apogée," Wolfe instructed, "particularly anything brought to the kitchen or Mr. Marchand's office. Note times, suppliers, who receives the deliveries, and where items are stored." "You got it, Mr. Wolfe," Fred said, making notes in his small pad. "How long do you want me there?" "Through tomorrow morning, at least. The restaurant is preparing to reopen next week, so there should be significant activity." After Fred departed, Wolfe turned to me. "Archie, return to the restaurant. I want samples of all ingredients used in the sauce from Mr. Marchand's final meal." "I doubt they've kept them," I said. "Perhaps not. But Chef Benoit would have used standardized recipes and consistent sauces. Get what you can and speak with him specifically about the sauce preparation. I want to know if anything was different about that particular batch." I headed back to l'Apogée, arriving around 5 o'clock, when the kitchen would be in full pre-dinner preparation mode if they were operating normally, which they weren't. But I knew the staff would be there preparing for the reopening. I found Claude Benoit in the kitchen, supervising two sous chefs who were testing recipe modifications. He looked up with obvious irritation when I entered. "Mr. Goodwin, this is not a good time." "I understand, chef. I need information about the sauce served with Victor's dish at Mr. Wolfe's dinner." His expression darkened. "I have already told you it was prepared exactly to specification." "I believe you," I assured him. "But Mr. Wolfe is particularly interested in understanding why Mr. Marchand said it was wrong. Was there anything different about that batch? Any substitutions? Any change in procedure?" Benoit wiped his hands on his apron, considering. Finally, he shook his head. "No substitutions. The sauce is a complex reduction that takes 3 days to prepare properly. I supervised every step, personally." "Can you tell me the ingredients?" He listed them methodically, a mixture of stocks, wines, herbs, and other components I couldn't pronounce. Nothing seemed unusual to my untrained ear. "Do you still have any of those ingredients from that batch?" I asked. "The perishables? No, the wines, oils, and dried components. Yes." He studied me. "You think there was something wrong with the sauce? That it caused Victor's death?" "It's a possibility we're exploring," I admitted. He specifically mentioned it with his dying breath. That seemed significant. Something shifted in Benoit's demeanor. "Come with me." He led me to a storage area off the main kitchen and unlocked a cabinet containing various bottles and containers. "These are the base components. I will give you samples of each." While he carefully measured small portions into labeled containers, I asked, "Did Mr. Marchand use any of his personal olive oil in dishes served at the restaurant?" Benoit looked up sharply. "Number never. That oil was for his personal use only, his morning bread, occasionally a salad he made for himself. He was superstitious about it, said it was his secret to health." The irony wasn't lost on either of us. As I was leaving with a box of samples, I encountered Martine Rousseau in the hallway. She eyed the containers with interest. "Investigating the source?" she asked. "Mr. Wolfe has some theories he wants to test." She nodded thoughtfully. "The source was Claude's domain, but I noticed something that night. When Victor tasted it, he looked surprised before he collapsed. Not just ill, surprised. As if something was different than he expected." "Exactly." She glanced toward the kitchen, then lowered her voice. "There's something else you should know. Anthony and Philip have been having intense discussions since your last visit. I overheard them arguing about getting stories straight before the police return." I thanked her for the information and continued on my way, making a brief stop at Marchand's office to collect a few more items. As I was leaving, I noticed Philip Voss watching me from the wine cellar doorway, his expression unreadable. Back at the brownstone, I found Wolfe in the middle of a phone conversation with someone who appeared to be giving him information about metallic compounds and their effects. When he hung up, he examined the samples I'd brought. "Dr. Vollmer will analyze these immediately," he said, setting aside several containers. "Did you learn anything useful from Chef Benoit?" I reported my conversations with both Benoit and Martine, including the detail about Teller and Voss having suspicious discussions. Wolfe listened intently, his eyes partially closed in concentration. "Interesting," he said finally. "Particularly Ms. Rousseau's observation about surprise rather than just illness." The phone rang. It was Saul, reporting that he'd observed Philip Voss meeting with a well-dressed man in a parked car 2 blocks from the restaurant, where they exchanged what appeared to be a folder for an envelope. "Follow the other man," Wolfe instructed. "Identify him if possible." As evening descended, Inspector Kramer arrived unannounced, chewing an unlit cigar and looking like a thundercloud. "Wolfe," he said, without preamble as I showed him in. The lab found the same compound in Marchand's olive oil that showed up in his tissue samples. And guess what else? We found a higher concentration in the sauce from his final meal. Someone doubled down on the poison that night. Wolfe's eyebrows rose fractionally. Indeed. That would explain the sudden collapse after months of gradual symptoms. We're bringing in the nephew and the sommelier for questioning, Kramer continued. But I want your take. You were there. You saw it happen. What did you observe? I observed a man taste his creation and recognize instantly that something was wrong, Wolfe replied. His distress began before he could have ingested enough of the new dose to cause such a rapid reaction. Kramer frowned. What are you saying? I'm saying, Inspector, that I believe I understand what happened to Victor Marchand. But I need one final piece of evidence to be certain. Wolfe turned to me. Archie, I need you to return to the restaurant tonight. There's something specific I need you to verify in the wine cellar. Now? I looked at my watch. Yes, now! And bring your camera. Wolfe's expression was intent. The final piece is there, and I believe I know where to look for it. Chapter 8. The Final Course. Monday evening, 6 days after Victor Marchand's death, the brownstone on West 35th Street was prepared for a most unusual dinner. Fritz had been in a state of controlled frenzy since morning, following Wolfe's exacting instructions with the focus of a diamond cutter. The dining room table was set for 8, the crystal and silver gleaming under the soft chandelier light. I had spent the weekend in a whirlwind of activity following my Friday night expedition to Lapogier's wine cellar, where I'd found exactly what Wolfe anticipated, documentation hidden in a false bottom of a wine crate that connected Philip Voss's private wine sales to offshore accounts, including regular payments to Anthony Teller. More damning was a small vial labelled in Voss's handwriting with instructions for accelerating the process. The lab had confirmed it contained a concentrated version of the same compound found in Marchand's olive oil. The final piece had clicked into place. At precisely 7 p.m., the doorbell rang. I admitted Inspector Kramer first, followed by Elaine Marchand. She was dressed elegantly in dark blue rather than morning black, her face composed but tense. "Mr. Wolfe is in the office," I told them. "The others should arrive shortly." "Others?" Kramer demanded. "What others?" "I agreed to come hear your theory, Goodwin, not attend a party." "All will become clear," I assured him, which did nothing to improve his mood. In the office, Wolfe was at his desk, freshly shaved and dressed for dinner. He greeted Elaine with a slight bow and acknowledged Kramer with a nod. "Thank you for coming," he said. "Tonight we will resolve the matter of Victor Marchand's death." "By hosting a dinner party?" Kramer asked incredulously. "By reconstructing essential elements of the event," Wolfe replied, "with certain critical differences." The doorbell rang again. This time it was Anthony Teller, looking immaculate as always, but with new lines of strain around his eyes. He faltered slightly upon seeing Kramer, but recovered quickly. "Mr. Teller?" Wolfe greeted him. "Thank you for accepting my invitation." "Mr. Wolfe." Teller nodded cautiously. "I wasn't expecting such distinguished company." Before anyone could respond, the bell rang again. This time it was Chef Benoit and Martine Rousseau arriving together. They were followed minutes later by Philip Voss, who entered with the careful precision of a man walking on thin ice. Once everyone was assembled in the office, Wolfe cleared his throat. "You were all present at Victor Marchand's final dinner," he began. "Tonight we will partake of a recreation of that meal, prepared according to the original recipes, to demonstrate exactly what happened that evening, and why." "This is irregular, Wolfe," Kramer growled. "Perhaps, but effective." Wolfe turned to Fritz, who had appeared in the doorway. "Is dinner ready?" "Oui, monsieur. Everything is prepared as specified." "Excellent." Shall we proceed to the dining room? I had arranged the seating to match the configuration from the fatal dinner at l'Apogée, with one crucial addition. Elaine Marchand now occupied the seat that had been empty due to her supposed migraine. Wolfe, of course, sat at the head of the table. The first 2 courses were served and consumed with minimal conversation, tension growing with each passing minute. Voss kept glancing at Teller, who maintained a rigid smile. Benoit watched every plate with professional scrutiny, while Martine observed the others with quiet intensity. Before the main course, Wolfe addressed the table. The dish we are about to enjoy is Victor Marchand's final creation, his heritage reimagined duck with its special sauce, prepared by Fritz according to Chef Benoit's exact specifications. Fritz and his temporary assistant entered with covered plates, setting them before each guest with ceremonial precision. Before we begin, Wolfe continued, I should explain what I have discovered about Victor Marchand's death. He was being slowly poisoned through his personal olive oil, a fact now confirmed by laboratory analysis. The poison was a metallic compound that accumulated in his system over months, causing his various health complaints. Elaine gasped. Kramer leaned forward, his attention fully on Wolfe. The olive oil came from a supplier partially owned, through a hidden arrangement, by Anthony Teller. Wolfe nodded toward Marchand's nephew, whose face had gone pale. Mr. Teller has significant gambling debts and stood to gain an increased share of the restaurant upon his uncle's death. This is absurd, Teller protested. I would never. However, Wolfe continued as if there had been no interruption, Mr. Teller was not acting alone. His partner in this enterprise was Philip Voss, who had been systematically stealing valuable wines from the restaurant's cellar and selling them to private collectors, a theft amounting to over $100,000. Voss sat perfectly still, his face a mask. Mr. Marchand had begun to suspect the wine theft and was quietly gathering evidence. Had he taken his suspicions to the authorities, both Mr. Voss's profitable side business and his reputation would have been destroyed. When Mr. Marchand invited me to dinner, a renowned detective known for his palate, Mr. Voss feared his scheme had been discovered. Fritz removed the covers from our plates, revealing the beautifully arranged duck dish with its glossy sauce. The slow poisoning through the olive oil was Mr. Teller's method, designed to eventually cause his uncle's death from what would appear to be natural causes. But when Mr. Voss realized that Marchand might expose him, he took a more direct approach. He added a concentrated dose of the same poison to the sauce of Marchand's dish. Only Marchand's dish, the night of our dinner. Wolfe lifted his fork. But here is the crucial detail. Victor Marchand was a chef of exceptional talent and experience. When he tasted his creation, he immediately detected something was wrong, not with the flavor profile he had designed, but with the sauce itself. His palate was so refined that he tasted the poison before it could take full effect. His last words, I added, the sauce was wrong. Exactly, Wolfe nodded. The surprise that Ms. Rousseau observed on his face was recognition. He knew instantly that his sauce had been tampered with. His collapse was hastened by the shock of this realization, combined with his already weakened system from months of low-level poisoning. Voss suddenly pushed back from the table. This is outrageous! You have no proof of any of this. On the contrary, Wolfe replied calmly. Archie discovered your records of wine sales in the hidden room of the wine cellar, along with evidence of payments to Mr. Teller. More damning was the vial of concentrated poison in your personal effects, which matches exactly the compound found in both the olive oil and in the sauce from Marchand's final meal. Kramer was on his feet now. Philip Voss, Anthony Teller, you're both under arrest for the murder of Victor Marchand. What happened next occurred so quickly that even I, who was watching for trouble, was caught by surprise. Voss grabbed a steak knife from the table and lunged toward the door, only to find Saul Panzer blocking his path. In his desperation, Voss swung around and grabbed Elaine Marchand, holding the knife to her throat. "Back off!" he shouted. "I'm walking out of here!" Kramer reached for his gun, but before he could draw it, Elaine Marchand drove her elbow hard into Voss's ribs with surprising force. As he doubled over, I tackled him from behind, and Saul moved in to secure the knife. "Well done, Mrs. Marchand," Wolfe said appreciatively as Kramer handcuffed the sommelier. "Fencing lessons," she replied, straightening her dress with dignity. Victor insisted. He said a woman in the restaurant business should know how to handle herself. After Kramer had taken Voss and Teller away, Teller having surrendered without resistance, his face ashen, the remaining guests finished the meal in a more relaxed atmosphere. Chef Benoit was particularly impressed with Fritz's recreation of the dish. "Perfect," he declared. Victor would have approved. "The sauce is correct this time," Martine added with a sad smile. Later that evening, after our guests had departed, I sat with Wolfe in the office while he enjoyed his customary beer. "A satisfactory conclusion," he remarked. "Except for the part where our client almost got a knife to the throat," I pointed out. A risk I had calculated as minimal, given Saul's positioning and Mrs. Marchand's own capabilities, which she had mentioned to you previously. She never mentioned fencing lessons to me. An oversight on your part, not hers. Wolfe took a sip of beer. The case presented an interesting problem of method and opportunity. The gradual poisoning might well have succeeded had Mr. Voss not panicked and accelerated the process. And had Marchand not had the palate to detect it immediately, I added. Indeed, in the end, it was his greatest gift that allowed him to identify his killer, even if he could not name him before death. "Poetic justice," I said. Speaking of which, Elaine Marchand mentioned she's planning to continue with the cookbook project Marchand started with Martine. She thinks it will be a fitting tribute. "A worthy endeavor," Wolfe agreed. "Legacies are often found in unexpected places." He returned to his beer and I to my desk, where I began organizing my notes for the final report. Outside, a spring rain had begun to fall, washing the city streets clean. In the brownstone on West 35th Street, all was right with the world, at least until the next case disturbed our routine. But that's another story. I hope you enjoyed this journey into Nero Wolfe's world of deduction, fine dining, and murder. If you did, please hit that subscribe button to join our Café Stories family. We share new mysteries every day. This is Alfie, thanking you for listening, and I'll see you in the next story.